Welcome back to Mind and Magic. We had previously discussed, albeit briefly, planets in exaltation, one of which being Saturn, exalted in the sign of Libra. And we had talked about how Libra is a sign of relationships, and Saturn represents contracts and binding things, and essentially marriage. Saturn, exalted in the sign of Libra, represents marriage. But the planets and signs represent so much more than that. Saturn in Libra also represents our court systems. The entire court system is essentially a Saturnine cult. When you step into a court of law, you're stepping into a temple of Saturn. Let's get into it.
Are you ready for this?
You know, I've been asked on occasion, why is it that astrology is so prevalent in the occult? You know, it's in all the grimoires, Magick has astrological timings, even tarot cards have their astrological correspondences. And why is that? And the answer is, the old gods never really went away. They've just been hidden. And the word occult literally means hidden. So now you know part of what's being hidden. And we don't have to look very far either. These things are hidden in plain sight. And the reason most people don't see them is because they simply don't have the occult knowledge to recognize them. And a lot of the occult knowledge that you'll gain in order to recognize things is in their correspondences. What do these planets, what do these old gods rule over? And once you learn that, once you learn the correspondences, then you can spot this hidden occult knowledge very easily. But it can take a while to learn the correspondences because in astrology, the planets rule over everything. You have to split and divvy everything up between these 7 traditional planets and their signs, and even more in modern astrology. So to make lists as you go is an extremely useful thing to do. Now, over time, you just learn them, you just know them. But as you're learning them, keeping a list of correspondences handy is the way to go. So let's go over the ways that the court system, that is the United States court system, is all about the planet Saturn exalted in the sign of Libra. First off, what is a planet in exaltation? What does it mean to be exalted in a particular sign? Well, simply put, that planet does well in that sign to the point where its energy is amplified. It becomes stronger, where conversely a planet in its fall in a sign will be weakened. So when Saturn's in Libra, that means that it's more powerful there. And as lowly humans, we exalt this power. We revere it. But whether we do or not doesn't really matter. What matters is the planet is stronger in signs that it is exalted in. And that's the primary reason why. As such, Saturn is strongest in Libra. And we're about to go into how this relates to our court system, our legal system. So first, we need to take a look at Libra and what it represents. Again, the planet and the signs represent all kinds of things. There's just saying how Libra also represents marriage and partnerships. But it also represents the law, justice. The sign of Libra is represented by the scales of justice. And the planet that becomes the strongest in the sign of justice, Libra, is Saturn. So we need to get into the correspondences of Saturn to see just how much of the old gods they've hidden away from you. First of all, Saturn has a correspondence with authority. The court system has a tremendous amount of authority. We have justices in the court system who even rule for or against presidents. They have a tremendous amount of authority. And we see when that authority is defied, such as in the recent case of the Texas Governor Abbott at the southern U.S. border, having a standoff with Federal Border Patrol. Now, I'm not here to discuss that particular issue other than to say that it's a big deal simply because the U.S. Supreme Court's authority is being disregarded, which is certainly going to cause problems. For if one disregards the highest rule of law, being the Supreme Court, then is there really a rule of law at all, if one could simply choose to disregard? It's going to be very interesting to see how all of that pans out. But Saturn is the authority, and Saturn's avatar of authority is the judge, or the justice. And he or she sits upon the bench, their position in the courtroom, which is all the way in the front and at the highest point. The bench is built as a type of podium which overlooks the rest of the court, and by overlook, I mean looking down upon, as Saturn is the highest in the order of the planets. That's why it has authority. These judges wear robes of black, black being the color of Saturn. One of the colors, but its primary color. During or when court proceedings are ending, the judge will bang a gavel, as Saturn has a correspondence with sound, when the judge is ruling upon something, or when there's too much chaos going on in the courtroom, he will bang the gavel and say, "Order in the court." Saturn corresponds with order. It is a huge correspondence with order. And you must refer to the judges as Your Honor. And yes, you guessed it, Saturn has a correspondence with honor. Referring to judges in this way, having to show them this level of respect, is in of itself an act of exaltation. And you cannot be disrespectful to the judge or the court, or you may be held in contempt of court, which is an offense, and an offense that could possibly land you some jail time. One of the court's most prevalent punishments is serving time. Time corresponds with Saturn, Chronos. Now, there are different types of cases in courts. There are civil and criminal. Civil usually going after someone's money, and in criminal court, either fines, serving time, or even losing their lives, as in the case of death penalties, depending upon the severity of the crimes they are charged with. Money also has a correspondence to Saturn, as Saturn is a very earthy material planet. But time is the stronger correspondence. And I find it interesting that the Saturnine court tends to give out punishments that correspond with Saturn itself. And in the case of time, takes away that which Saturn provides you. Now, we're going to look at the ways that you end up in the court of Saturn. We had just talked about how there are two types of cases in court. There are civil and criminal cases. The criminal ones, you commit a crime and you're caught committing a crime, and you end up in court. A crime being something that causes another person harm or loss. Now, that could be bodily injury or even losing their life. It could be loss of property or damage to that property, loss of monetary value, or committing some sort of fraud that ends up causing harm to somebody or loss to somebody. Now, why is it that the judge who represents Saturn has the authority to deal out the punishment? Because juries only convict people. Juries only decide whether or not somebody is guilty or not guilty, whether they actually committed said crime, whether the charges are justified. Juries never pass sentence. Judges pass sentence. Judges, and by extension Saturn, deal out the punishment. And it's because that Saturn is the lord of karma. It is the very planet in astrology that deals out the punishment in your life. Now, there's a dark side to each and every astrological planet. All of our woes don't come from Saturn. But in the case of karmatic payback for the things that you have done, absolutely, it's Saturn. Saturnine judges alone have that authority to pass sentence. Now, in the matter of civil cases, someone is typically trying to recoup losses for the harm that they've been caused. And it could be for any number of reasons, including wrongful death suits, in which case that they're typically trying to extract money out of the defendants, who they claim caused the loss. And it's almost always money that they're seeking, monetary damages, Because how does Saturn deal out justice in these cases? It tries to balance the scales of Libra. Well, how do you balance scales? You take some from one side and you put it on the other until it's balanced. That something being money, the thing with the most earthly value. Saturn having a correspondence to the element of earth. What else does Saturn correspond to? Contracts, duty, obligations. Not fulfilling your contractual obligations is a surefire way to end up in the court of Saturn. Now, I just said earlier that Saturn corresponds with honor. Well, it also corresponds with duty, keeping your word. The law is very big on keeping your word, keeping your contracts, fulfilling your obligations. And if you don't, then it's going to be trouble for you. Saturn corresponds to contracts as it is a binding planet. Contracts bind things. Saturn binds things. Just as a marriage is legally binding. As we had previously gone over, that's a pretty big Saturn and Libra correspondence, marriage. Well, all contracts are equally binding. The words that you sign your name to. And it's your personal responsibility and duty to understand the things that you're signing your name to. This is why ignorance of the law is no excuse. There was fine print there, and you didn't take the time to read them. So always know the details of a contract before you sign them, especially the fine print, because that's where they like to hide things. And I'm sure there are other correspondences that I'm just forgetting, or, like when the judge first enters the court. The bailiff will say, "All rise, the Honorable so-and-so, what's his name, presiding," and everyone must stand. They have to show reverence to Saturn, to the judge, because that judge, Saturn, is in exaltation. It's another act of reverence and exaltation. Now, in the case of planetary magic, my recommendation for anyone who's having legal issues, especially any that may end up in court, now sometimes lawyers hash these things out before they reach court, is to work with the planet Saturn, meaning your working will be on a Saturday, either in the hour of Saturn or the hour of Venus, as Venus is the ruler of Libra. And for those who have a basic understanding of astrology and are somewhat capable of producing a natal chart with their transits, keep an eye on the transits of Libra. Any planet that may be aspecting the sign of Libra may or may not impact your case, depending upon the nature of your case and the planet involved. Any candles that are used should be black or brown, and any oils or herbs used should have a Saturn correspondence to them. It doesn't have to be every herb, and you have to be somewhat careful when using herbs that correspond to Saturn, because many can be toxic. But at least the oil should be either a Saturn oil, or there's even a court case oil made specifically for court cases. And then when you go to perform the magic, you do so on the day of Saturn, in the hour of Saturn or Venus, and you perform it as if you are in the court of Saturn, stating your case, and then reaching a ruling in your favor. Now, court case magic is essentially prejudging the case, reaching a judgment before it even gets to court. And judgment itself has a correspondence with Saturn. It's part of being the Lord of Karma. Oh, and another one just came to me, where if you are found guilty and sentenced by the judge, big on sentences. Sentence is a collection of words. Saturn is real big on words, because words are structure given to thoughts. And Saturn is a planet that rules over structure. So if you are sentenced to jail, you will spend your time in a cell, which is a limited space. You serve time, which is ruled over by Saturn, and we just talked about that part of it. But Saturn also rules space. It's time and space. They're going to make you spend your time in a very limited space if the judge gives you a jail sentence. But yeah, any way you slice it, the court is coming up Saturn. Saturn in Libra. And your average person has absolutely no idea. It is occult, hidden in plain sight. I want to thank you all for listening. If you're interested in learning more about planetary magic, check out the 7 Planetary Powers program over at mindandmagic.com. It's designed to get you up and running quickly with a corresponding keyword system and planetary hours for all of the 7 traditional astrological planets. Check out Patreon, Subscribestar, and YouTube memberships where Occult in Plain Sight videos like this are posted first, well ahead of all other social media. And those links will be in the description and on the screen momentarily. This is Frater Xavier wishing you the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care.